We're so connected. We have so much opportunity. But many of us don't stop to think, in the moment, what is really good about this moment? What am I so grateful for? Why do I appreciate it?
Welcome to the Women Inspired Podcast, brought to you by Modern Well, a beautiful woman-centered collaborative workspace in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, April Seifert, psychologist, entrepreneur, and self-proclaimed life experience junkie. Each week, I will introduce you to a different woman who is succeeding and inspiring others in one way or another. We'll dive into her story, her successes, failures, and the lessons she has learned along the way, all with the goal of inspiring you to listen to that inner voice who keeps reminding you that there is something you want to take action on. You are so much more capable and powerful than you give yourself credit for. Inside of you is a woman on fire. Let's let her out and see what happens. Here we go. Friends, welcome back to the Women Inspired Podcast. My name is April Seifert, and I'm your host. And this week, we are hearing from an awesome woman named Alex Amarotico, and she is the author of an incredible upcoming book that just total self-disclosure, I found her book randomly on Amazon and I reached out to her, just like cold called her and basically asked if she would be on the podcast. So I'm really excited. Her book is called The Secret Joy of Hygge, a practical guide to cultivating happiness in the everyday. And just from that title, I guarantee you can tell why I'm so excited to have Alex on the show. So in the show, we're going to talk all about her book. We're going to talk all about the process for writing her book while she had a full-time job, which is so difficult. I know so many people have the goal of writing a book, so I had to ask her about that. And then she gives some really practical advice about how we can use this concept of hygge in our day-to-day life in order to make tiny changes that can improve our happiness. So I can't wait for you to meet Alex Amarotico. Alex, I am so excited that you are joining me for this episode of the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. So excited.
So this is kind of funny because I get my guests in a variety of different ways. Sometimes I find people on social media. Sometimes people's publicists will reach out to me. A variety of different ways bring somebody to the podcast. And it's not as often that I am digging through Amazon and come across a book that just looks so interesting that I just have to cold email the author because I just want to see if I can get her. And that was the case with you. And I'm so happy that you said yes.
Yay, me too. And I'm so glad that you found me on Amazon.
That means
awesome. That others will too.
Yay, good. Okay, so we're going to get into your book in a minute, but tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you.
Sure, absolutely. So I live in New York City at the moment, but I'm originally from Oregon. I was born and raised there. And when I was in high school, my parents were absolutely amazing and very much go ahead and fly the nest and, discover yourself. And I was able to go on an international exchange. And by some wild chance, I got Denmark, which I knew nothing about. It was a country that I knew was in Northern Europe, but other than Hans Christian Andersen was from there, I had no insight into the country at all. And I ended up living there for a year. And the things I learned in that first year at the age of 16 changed my life completely. And I ended up going back to Copenhagen for many years in my early 20s before I moved to New York. And it just changed my life for the better. So now I'm sharing that story with others.
I love that. Travel is amazing. Travel, my husband and I love traveling as well. And getting out of your culture and just seeing how other cultures manage day-to-day life and how they might approach situations differently, it can just open your eyes to a different way to live. It's just incredible.
It's so true. I think that we can get so narrow focused in our own world and in our own realities. And to see that perspective of how other people are living, it can just really help alter our own appreciation for our everyday.
Totally agree. So as I mentioned, I found you on Amazon as I was sort of poking around, looking at books as I do so often, and I stumbled across your incredible book. So tell us the title of your book and a little bit about it.
Absolutely. So my book is called The Secret Joy of Hygge, and it's a practical guide to cultivating happiness in your everyday. And it comes out on Tuesday. I'm so excited. And basically it's a quick look into the Danish philosophy of hygge, which is an untranslatable into English word. And it shows you how to make small changes that'll bring more warmth and joy to your everyday life. And it's simple things. It's like sipping a cup of tea, nesting at your desk, gathering loved ones around your table, lighting candles in the evening. It's all really simple, straightforward, practical things that can really increase your joy.
That is amazing. It's amazing. And those folks who have listened to me for a little while, I'm sure you can tell immediately off the bat why I was so excited to talk to Alex and why this book really caught my eye, because something that we talk about a lot on the podcast and with my, former guests is we talk about, the importance of the thousands of little decisions we make in our day. In our day-to-day life, we make just so many decisions, from tiny things like when we're going to set our alarm and what the first thing we're going to do when we get up is, to what we're going to eat for lunch and who we might see and how we're going to spend our time. And, you and I were chatting a little bit before we hopped on to record, and those decisions that we make, while seemingly tiny ones, they ultimately impact the quality and the overall experience of this one single life that we're going to have, which makes these tiny little decisions not tiny at all.
I completely agree with that. I was saying that it's so interesting with hygge because it seems like such a simple concept. It's not making big overarching recommendations for how to just completely transform your life. I think people think that these big opportunities are so important and that's all that's going to really make an impact. And it's actually in the small stuff. It's those moments throughout your day, just like you said, that sort of add up over time. And that's what really brings us the most happiness. So it's really interesting that these small changes can make such a huge impact.
Totally. So let's dive in there. You were mentioning, again, before we hopped on to record, you were mentioning the different sections of your book, and I got so excited. And you specifically talked a lot about the concept of happiness and the research that you did that uncovered things that can improve our happiness and things that can't. And there were some surprises there. So I'm wondering if you can sort of, it's always a hard task to ask somebody, hey, your big book, can you sum it up in, 20 minutes? But can you just help us understand what you learned from that research and in what drives happiness and what doesn't?
Yes, absolutely. So I just found it so fascinating diving in. They say that Danes are the happiest country and the happiest people. And so, of course, the rest of the world would like to know what their secret is. And, they really do credit it to hygge. And there's been so many studies about happiness and so much research into sort of what makes humans happy, what drives our intentions, what drives our joy. And again, it's just interesting to see that it really is the small things that make the biggest impact. So one thing I found really fascinating is in the realm of your income and how much money you have. I don't think many people would admit it, but many of us think that having more money will equal more happiness, right? We'll be able to buy all the things that we want. We won't worry about bills. It'll just overall increase our joy. And it's actually really fascinating that might not be the case. So they've found that $75,000 in the United States per person per household tends to be the right amount to sort of peak our happiness level as far as money is concerned. And it's really interesting to see that if you make more than that, there have been studies that have shown that it can actually decrease your happiness. So your level of happiness you think is going to go up and up and up with your, salary and experience, but really it's the decisions that you make as you make more money that are going to be the most impactful. So I found that really interesting to look at. And then the other thing that's so interesting about happiness is that many people have found that you're actually born with the maximum level of happiness that you're capable of. So your body is capable of, say, there's somebody at 100%, and then I'm at 75% of their level of happiness. We both could be at max happiness, and still one of us is actually maybe happier than the other, right? It's just sort of your capacity. And about half of that happiness capacity is just predetermined at birth. So that makes that rest of the happiness that you can experience all the more important because you're in complete control over that, right? And it might be a smaller amount than we actually think. So it is those sort of small moments that you can make all the better that make the biggest difference.
So what I like about that is you're focusing so much on, these small decisions that you make. And in the same way that you mentioned that people, look at hygge and they think, wow, how can it be that simple? How can it just be these tiny things? They can't actually be that important. They can't actually be that impactful. When in reality, that's the same thing that I think people think about when it comes to contemplating those small decisions and the impact that they can have on your life, right? Like we think about this, a word is big, not like number of characters, but like as big and as weighty as the word life. Like this should be some grand thing. Like this should be some big, grandiose, intangible thing, but it's not. I mean, Eckhart Tolle is one of the leading philosophers on the importance of mindfulness and the impact that that can have. And he has the most simple definition of life. It's just a series of todays. It's a series of strung together moments, which means, to your point, the decisions you're making moment to moment are so important. They're incredibly important because that's your life experience right there. That's the whole thing.
That's absolutely right. I love Eckhart as well. And I've actually recently been listening to the series he's doing with Oprah on Super Soul Sundays. I think, even that is just a moment of like, how can you bring a little bit more mindfulness into your day? We could walk around, walk our dogs or, drive to work and listen to the news and maybe not feel a lot of joy, every moment. Or maybe we could listen to, just to music to sort of feel that mindfulness. But I find that listening to sort of podcasts, even like yours, that are inspiring and sort of bringing this conversation to light, that can help me be more present every single day too. It's just that small reminder of like, oh yes, I can come back to this reality. It's not all about, traffic and paperwork and meetings. It's okay. What are the small things that I'm grateful for and present? And it's okay to need a reminder of that every now and then. And so I find that really fascinating as well.
Well, and you just brought up the word gratitude. It's funny because we can think of, if you think about physical health, right? Maintaining our physical health, we can rattle off very quickly the tiny handful of things that everyone should. Whether we do, that's different. But the small handful of things that everyone should do to be a healthy person, right? Exercise, eat well, sleep, drink water, avoid alcohol, those sorts of things. We know what all of those things are. When you think about mental health, I mean, it gets a little bit grayer. We're doing a better job these days, but we don't do a great job of talking through the stuff that's inside of our control. There's a bunch that's not. So please don't think I'm oversimplifying the concept of mental health, but the proportion of it that is in our control, we don't do a very good job of equipping people with the tools and techniques that they can use in order to become as psychologically strong as they possibly can, to put themselves in the best possible position to sort of weather life's ups and downs. And when you look at a lot of research, gratitude is one of those preventive things. If you can do it on a day-to-day basis, it helps ground you in reality, and it helps ground you in the notion that, like, it helps you right size your problems. Like, how big actually is this problem before it takes you under, when it's not actually that big of a deal in the first place. So gratitude is such a huge deal. Was that something that you uncovered as part of your research? Like, did that play a role at all as you were researching or writing the book?
Yes, absolutely. So I just think that it's such an interesting time we live in, right? We actually have everything. So gratitude seems like something that should be really straightforward, right? So many of us have access to things that we could have never thought possible even 20 years ago, right? We're so connected. We have so much opportunity. But many of us don't stop to think, in the moment, what is really good about this moment? What am I so grateful for? Why do I appreciate it, right? So in a moment of having dinner with friends, maybe it was stressful to get all of the food to prepare. Maybe it was stressful to clean the house. Maybe, you forgot something and your husband had to run out and grab it. And it was just this whirlwind of stress getting everybody to the dinner table. But here you are all together around the table. You're laughing. There's candles lit. You're enjoying great food. Notice that moment, right? So many of us forget to think like, oh, this is such an incredible moment. I'm so grateful to be here. What a joy it is to be alive, right? I mean, it seems so small, but this is what I think Danes have really mastered, is that moment of saying like, this is so HOO-GAH, right? This is like this word allows them to say, this is so cozy and this is such a wonderful moment. And I think that that ties really, really closely to gratitude. And I try to now do that as much as humanly possible. I met this incredible woman a few months ago, actually at a work conference, and I was having just a crazy day. I mean, you know how they are, right? Where everything seems to be going wrong. You have a million deadlines. At the time, I was trying to both write a book and work a full-time job at the same time, and I was barely sleeping. And I met her at the end of the day, and I was just haggard, basically with stress. And she said, "What's the good in the problem that you're having right now?" I didn't I didn't even know this woman, right? And she just looked at me and she didn't know what my day was, anything. She didn't know what my problems were. And she said, "What's the good?" And I just looked at her and burst into tears. And I said, you're right. And I said, the problem is I am so fortunate I get to write a book. I'm so fortunate I get to have this incredible job. I'm so fortunate I get to be here at this conference with you. And, and that just completely shifted my mindset. And I finished up my work and I went out, for dinner and drinks with this group of women that I'd never met before. And I sat next to her and I thought, this is these are the reminders, people get put in front of you for a reason. And that's really what HOO-GAH is all about. Like, what is the good in everything, whether it's a problem, whether it's just an evening at home, how can you be grateful for those moments?
So two things that I want to touch on. Number one, then this concept of HOO-GAH is more than doing those little things, right? It's more than just lighting the candle. It's more than just, making the phone call. It's more than just gathering the people around the table, but it's taking it that one step further and actually being intentional about noticing what's happening and being grateful for what's happening and just pausing for a moment and allowing that margin and white space to open up so that you can reflect, even if it's just for a brief moment, on what it is that you have done. Like it seems so much more than just when you describe it that way, it isn't just these little things that you're going to do. It's little things plus the intention that comes with it. That's the piece that I think people have an extremely hard time doing. Like pausing long enough to even notice. That's so hard for people to do. Have you found that?
Absolutely. It's so hard to do. I don't mean to bring up Oprah all the time, but she, writes 5 things she's grateful for every day. And every time I hear her talk about that, I think, oh, I want to write 5 things I'm grateful for today. And then, you get busy and you end up going to sleep and you forgot to write those 5 things. And I think that's an incredible practice if that works for you. But what I love so much about HOO-GAH is it really is about noticing it in that moment and being thankful for it at that moment. So again, if you have the decision to make, if you can choose to make something a little bit more lovely and something that you're even more grateful for, again, if all of your needs are met, right? You're warm, you're inside, you have everything that you need. How can you elevate that experience a little bit more? So, if you want to be grateful for being at home watching Netflix with your family, on a cozy evening while it's storming outside, why not light a few more candles? Why not, bake fresh cookies to enjoy at the same time? There's just these little things that we can do that elevate that experience and make it even easier for us to be grateful in that moment, And even if it is just ordering pizza and and having, a simple evening at the end of the day, that's also something you can say, gosh, I'm so glad to be doing this. Like whatever is bringing you that joy, you made a decision to do it because it was going to make you happier. It was going to, move your day forward, and be grateful for that in the moment.
I love that so much. And from a cognitive perspective, this is something else that I talk about quite a bit on the podcast. This notion in cognitive psychology around people may have heard of like system 1 and system 2 thinking, or heuristic thinking versus more deliberate thinking. There's a lot of books that have been written about this. Thinking Fast and Slow, Tversky and Kahneman, they're really famous authors and a famous book if you want to check this out. But basically, there's this old part of our brain that is very heuristic. It's like one of the first parts of the brain to form evolutionarily, not like in our lifespan, but evolutionarily. And this part of the brain is like, its whole goal is to like keep us alive and keep us from getting sick. So it's job that it is extremely good at. It's constantly searching for threat and looking for negative things. And we've survived as a species. So yay, high five, it did its job. But what that means is our thinking is just naturally leaning in the negative direction. It just does. We as a species, again, we've survived this long because we're really good at identifying threats. But in this day and age, like there's really no enemy tribe that's going to come charging into my backyard and come and get me, or there's no, it would be very rare for there to be an animal that would come and attack me. There's not very many. I mean, we have the FDA, our food is relatively safe. Like we just don't have the same threats today. So this new part of our brain that has been formed, this like front part, the part, right behind your forehead, that part, it's this slow, deliberative, takes a lot of effort, must be more intentional to use. It's that part of the brain that we can use to balance out our thinking and pushing things in the positive direction. Sometimes people say like, oh, that's so unrealistic. Like negative things do happen. That's so unrealistic. No one's doubting that, but your brain and your mind and your thinking is already biased in the negative direction. Simply by focusing on positive things that you're suggesting, you're then balancing it out and getting a more accurate view of reality. So I just wanted to like interject that little piece of cognitive and positive psych because I don't think we realize the degree to which our thinking is so biased in the negative direction, and that, I mean, impacts just how we experience our day and how our minds feel to sort of live in. So I could see this being very adaptive, just from a psych well-being perspective.
Absolutely. I love that thinking so much. I think it's really important to acknowledge the negative because we all have it. I think some of us are diagnosed with anxiety and others, just that is our existence of like negative thoughts that we sometimes can't get rid of. And I think the best antidote that I've found is being present, right? As soon as you realize that you are the one who is moving backwards to remember something stressful or forwards, right, to worry about something in the future, those negative thoughts are often not actually living in the present moment, right? So even something as simple as you leave the house and then you have this, dreaded fear 5 minutes away that you didn't lock the door or you left the stove on, even though you didn't cook anything that morning, right? And here you are on the way to, to work or to meet friends or wherever, and you're in such a joyful mood. And then all of a sudden this negative thought comes. How do you get rid of that, right? And the best way to do it is to be present, to first of all, make sure you're always locking the door when you go out. And then you know that, that you're just having that negative thought and you can say, I see you. I'm going to come back to the present moment now and I'm going to be joyful, right? And I feel like sometimes it pops up when you're in the middle of something joyful as well. And I think it is just that lack of being present. It's so easy for our minds to wander. That if it wasn't this difficult, then we would all meditate every day, right? If it was easy to clear your mind and be mindful, we would all be just on another plane, right? But that's not easy. So the best thing that we can do is just when we see that negative thought, acknowledge it, come back to the moment and say, gosh, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to be here right now. I can deal with whatever problem or worry or anxiety I have later. I can double check, when I get home. But I find that has helped me a lot to curb those sort of negative thoughts.
I love it. So you kind of mentioned something a little earlier that I didn't dive into, but I want to now. You mentioned that you wrote this book while you had a full-time job. Tell me a bit about the process of writing the book, because I feel like writing a book has become the new marathon. Like everyone wanted to run a marathon for a while and now everybody wants to write a book. I'm not making fun, because myself included. I would love to hear about that process of doing this while you were so busy. Like, how did you make it a priority? How did you find the time? Just what was the process like?
Sure. And I agree. I think it is a goal that many of us have, and I feel so lucky to have achieved it. But it, did not come without work, right? So I had a full-time job. I still do. And when the opportunity came about, it was just one of the greatest days of my life, to receive an email saying, we found your blog where I wrote for years about living in Denmark and what it was like to live among Danes. And they said, we think you'd be the right person to talk about HOO-GAH. And, I was just pinching myself. I was so overjoyed. And then to our conversation earlier about negative thoughts, all of those fell in, right? You don't have time for this. You can't do this. You've never written that much before. I was just overwhelmed with all of the reasons why I shouldn't do it, you know? And I really had to make a decision in that moment. Like, are you going to let fear stop you from doing something you've always wanted to do? Because even when we get this is another reason why these small moments are so important. Because even when the big moments come around, it doesn't mean you're just instantly joyful and there's no problems that come with those big moments, right? So I really made a decision right then and there. I had actually a trip planned to Denmark a few weeks later. And so that trip changed from sort of pleasure and, vacation only to a research trip. And I wrote the book in 6 weeks. It was absolutely crazy. That's when I turned in the first full manuscript to my editor. I worked in the morning before I went to the office. I wrote in the evening when I got home, and I wrote all weekend, every weekend for about those full 6 weeks. I didn't drink that whole time. I didn't see very many friends socially. I really just focused in on the book and the writing. And I also had to, because I was doing all of this, I really had to live it, right? So there I was writing about HOO-GAH and saying, you really should be surrounded by comfort and things that make you happy. And then I'd look up from my sort of stupor of writing and go, I should light a candle. I should walk my dog.
Wow.
I should take put on a face mask or something like that. Just these little things like, oh yes. And it was such a good reminder to take care of myself, even in such a busy time, to be, writing about taking care of ourselves. And yeah, it was exciting. So it was not without sacrifice, and it was an absolutely crazy few months, but overall something that I knew I really wanted, and I knew that I could do if I believed in it and put in the work.
That is awesome. So by the time this airs, I believe your book will be out. So help us find it easier. So tell us, where can people buy your book? Tip, it's on Amazon already, but it's being advertised there for sure. But where can people buy your book? Where can they connect more with you? Are you still blogging? Can they follow you there? Like, give us all the details of where we can follow you if we want to learn more about HOO-GAH.
Yes, absolutely. So Amazon is definitely the best place. We are going to be in hopefully bookstores all over the place as well. But if you have a bookstore, please feel free to reach out. But Amazon, just searching HOO-GAH and you'll find it very quickly. It's the bright yellow one called The Secret Joy of Hygge. And my blog is called She Is Red. Spoiler alert, I am a redhead. And you can find me on Instagram under the same handle, She Is Red.
Love it. And for people who are searching, HOO-GAH is spelled Hyggge. But to make it even easier, I'll throw your book up on your on your Facebook page. I don't do that. I'll throw your book up on your show notes page so that it's really easy for people to just link directly up and buy it on Amazon. I just think it's going to be, I'm so excited that you were able to join me for this episode, because these, the information about how people can improve their day-to-day life using techniques like this that are so simple and so straightforward, it's just so valuable. The more busy we get, the more we see, mental illness rising, the more we see people struggling to balance a lot of things and trying to maintain some level of happiness. We need these really simple, tactical, straightforward things that we can do to just enjoy our lives a bit more. So thank you so much, Alex, for being here. I really appreciate you jumping on this episode with me.
Thank you for having me, April. And thank you for doing this all year round. I'm so glad to listen.
All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Alex Amarotico. She is the author of the brand new book, The Secret Joy of Hygge, A Practical Guide to Cultivating Happiness in the Everyday. I'm going to call out two things. You know where I'm going to go first, because it's the whole topic of her book, but this notion of being able to make small decisions each day in order to increase our happiness is such an important one. Before we started recording, she said one of the big criticisms that she gets, and that, HOO-GAH gets in general, is that it's too simple. It can't be this simple. It can't be the fact that these small changes could actually improve my happiness. But research supports her, and you have a whole, country of people and a whole culture of people who are using this in their day-to-day lives, and it's working because they're the happiest people on the planet. So I just think it's so incredible that she spent this time to research and write this book on these small decisions that we make every day. Because you guys know me. I mean, you know from listening to the podcast that it's such an important thing, like the way that I think about our time, right? Time is the most non-renewable resource on the planet. It's the thing you're not getting more of. The way that we spend our time and how we can make, that experience more joyful and happier, even if it's just 2 degrees more joyful and happier, it's a huge impact over the course of a lifetime. So I want you to really consider the exact things that Alex is saying. How can you make each little, situation of your life, how can you turn the volume up just a notch? Can you light a candle? Can you bake some cookies? Can you call a friend? Can you put on a cozy sweater? Like, what can you do that would make each moment of your life just 1 degree happier even? Because it's going to elevate the rest of your life. It just will. Like it's the sum total of how you're going to spend your days. And if your days are just a little bit happier, your life is going to be just a little bit happier. So I really suggest you guys grab her book and do the things that, the really practical tips that she has inside her book. The second thing I want to note is I loved the really short but impactful conversation we had about what it was like for her to write this book. It's so neat that, she was writing this blog just purely out of joy, and she was approached about writing a book, and she said yes. I know maybe some people are feeling this knee-jerk reaction to look at that and say, well, that's easy for her. A publisher approached her and they asked her to write the book. Well, sure, but she didn't have to say yes. And she could have listened to all of those doubts that popped into her mind immediately. Like as soon as the momentary elation went away, she immediately started doubting her ability to write the book and whether she'd have enough time and whether she was skilled enough or had anything to say that people would care about. I mean, that's something that all of us go through. But she said yes, and she did it anyway. And she did it while having to work around a massive barrier that she had in order to achieve this end goal. Now, I want to make a really important distinction. Lots of times I talk about not allowing your work to completely consume the rest of your life, right? Have some boundaries, be able to put your work away, enjoy your nights, enjoy your weekends, enjoy your time with your friends and family, right? Time, non-renewable resource. You're not getting more time back with them either. But she was making, when I talk about that, I'm talking about it on a chronic basis, like chronically, don't give up your entire life just for your job. But for her, she's talking about a very acute investment that she's making in order to achieve a lifelong goal. And that's something very different. So it's something to think about in terms of, can you make a small sacrifice, a small investment? Can you push in a direction that makes you uncomfortable for a short time in order to achieve a goal that you've had your entire life? And if you want to write a book and you have a full-time job, here's a beautiful example of a woman who did just that while working within the cracks of her day. All right, you guys, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. I loved meeting Alex. Let me tell you, we chatted before we hopped on and before we recorded, and she is just as sweet and wonderful and beautiful as she was on this interview. So I highly suggest you check out her blog, check out her book, follow her on Instagram. I'll link to all those things on her show notes page so that you guys have easy access to all of that. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Go light a candle, bake some cookies, wear some fuzzy socks, do something to make yourself 1% happier this week. Before we close out today, I want to say thank you to my producer, Cameron Hill, and to my incredible sponsor, Modern Well. If you want to learn more about how you can reach your goals in a one-of-a-kind work-life community, visit www.modernwell.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit from this inspiring message. And if you have a moment, click the link in the episode description to leave me a rating and a review on iTunes. It would mean so much to me.
Finally, I want to remind you that it is absolutely possible to live a happy, fulfilling life, even in spite of all of the chaos and demands we all experience. Sign up at aprilseifert.com to gain access to tools that will help you do just that. I have carefully created and curated a set of tools that combine the powerful fields of psychology and design thinking to help you intentionally create a fulfilling, happy life you love. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and until next week, stay inspired.